Welcome back to Living in His Purpose podcast. So, today I want to start with a thought that has been sitting with me for a little while. I think one of the greatest gifts that God gives us in this life are people. And sometimes one of the hardest parts about this life are people. Isn't that true? Some relationships feel grounded and easy, and some relationships feel very complicated. And some people walk into your life and you think, oh my goodness, where have you been? I have had those experiences more than once, and I know that they're God moments and God friendships. But it's fun. It's fun to see that. And then there are relationships that were like, what just happened? Was this a good thing or a bad thing? And they leave us confused and disappointed and exhausted, or we're wondering, am I expecting too much? Why does this relationship feel hard? Or maybe for some of you listening, you're hearing, why do I feel lonely even when I'm surrounded by people? I think healthy connection is something so many of us are craving right now. I think that's why social media is so popular. And honestly, especially as women, I feel like this is a thing because we carry a lot. We're caregivers, we're moms, grandmas, wives, friends, nurses. We're the dependable ones, the one everyone calls, the one who notices when someone's hurting, the one who shows up. And if we're not careful, we quietly become the one running on empty too. And I really don't think God intended for us to do life unsupported. I think we were created for connection, but healthy connection, grounded connection, not perfect people, but relationships that help keep us steady. People who point us back toward truth. People who remind us who we are when life gets hard. And before we jump in today, I do want to mention something really quick. If this conversation about slowing down, healthy connection, hearing from God, feeling more grounded sounds like something that your heart has been craving, I want to invite you to my upcoming retreat, June 13th, 4 to 7, here in Aurora. You can send me a message if you have questions. So what I'm doing is I'm creating a really peaceful, encouraging space to be intentional with God. We need to move from knowing about God to experiencing God. But I think that's hard for some of us. So that's what we're going to work through. We're just going to breathe a little bit because life gets loud. Relationships get complicated. And sometimes we need intentional space to slow down long enough to hear what God is really trying to say to us. It's going to feel very warm, very welcoming. And honestly, I'm just excited about where we're going to have it at a friend's house. And it's just a beautiful place to be. And I'm looking forward to just sitting with women who love Jesus, who are trying to grow. If that sounds like something you need, send me a message. Click on the link below for the event details, and I'm always here to answer questions. Okay, I would love to absolutely have you there. All right, let's talk about healthy connections. This is one of the foundational things that I believe Christian women need to know about, practice, share, and be able to share easily. How to have healthy connections. So this is part of my spring series, the foundational things that I think every Christian woman needs to know. We were created for connection. And I think sometimes in Christian circles, we accidentally over-spiritualize independence. And this is what that sounds like. It's just me and Jesus. Okay, I've actually said that. So sometimes when I say things, I think, ouch, I've said that. And then I understand the heart behind it. I've had the heart behind it. Jesus is enough, absolutely. But God created us for people too, from the very beginning, even in the garden. God literally looked at Adam and he said, it is not good for man to be alone. That verse is talking about marriage in context, but I think the principle still matters. Isolation was never really the design. We need people. And I know for some women that feels very tender, very not sure about that because maybe relationships have hurt in the past. Maybe friendships have disappointed you. Maybe family feels complicated. Maybe church relationships got messy. Maybe life taught you that becoming self-sufficient felt a lot safer than depending on people. And I completely understand every single one of those. But even when relationships have been painful, it doesn't mean we stop needing healthy ones. And what's interesting is science actually supports this too. Research has shown loneliness impacts more than we realize. There are statistics that loneliness is linked to higher anxiety, higher depression, increased stress, and actually affects your physical health. And it can even shorten your lifespan. And when I first learned that, I remember thinking, wow, God really did design us to need connection, because our minds and our bodies respond to relationship, not just spiritually or emotionally, but physically too. Our nervous systems actually respond to safe connection. So you've may heard me talk before about something called co-regulation. Fancy word, simple idea. Sometimes another calm person helps our body settle down. And I've actually experienced this multiple times. And this is one thing that I've learned working in the NICU. The way that we are does affect other people. I don't know how many times I have picked up a baby who is crying. This is like the secret, right? The secret sauce to a crying baby. You have to be calm. And when you're calm and you speak calmly and quietly, and one thing I add in there are nice words, when I tell them how beautiful they are and how loved they are, and that connection, I can feel their bodies settle down. They stop crying and they will actually just sit and look at you. And that's incredible. And for me, that's proof that another person can help us calm our nervous system. So I'm sure you've noticed this. So you've been overwhelmed, or your thoughts are just like spiraling. You're all upset. And then you sit with a friend who's very grounded, and suddenly you think, okay, maybe I am going to survive this. And that matters. Okay. This isn't weakness. This is part of how God designed us. And honestly, this makes me think about stories in the Bible like Ruth and Naomi. Naomi had experienced tremendous loss. Her world had changed. Life had not gone the way that she expected. And in the middle of that grief, God gave her Ruth, someone who stayed, someone who walked beside her, someone who said, where you go, I will go. And I think that there's something really beautiful there, because sometimes God cares for us through other people. And honestly, this feels very personal to me. So for about 19 years of my marriage, my husband worked overseas. And if you've ever had someone that you love go for long stretches of time, you know there are birthdays and holidays, hard moments, ordinary Tuesdays where it can feel really lonely. And at that time in my life, I also was not in a relationship with my family of origin. So for that season, it was really just me and my son. And I remember having this moment where I realized, you know what, I have to choose. I can isolate and let loneliness take over, or I could be brave enough to reach for connection. And honestly, reaching out felt very humbling sometimes. I didn't always want to be the one saying yes to an invitation or asking to join someone else's holiday gathering. Part of me was worried that I was imposing, but I also knew something mattered more. I didn't want my son growing up feeling like holidays were just another day because dad was gone. I wanted life to still feel meaningful, connected, warm. So little by little, I started saying yes. If someone invited us for Thanksgiving, we went. And I have a funny story about that. If you're ever interested, come ask me and I'll tell you a very funny story. Christmas gathering, we showed up. Birthday dinner, absolutely. And what's beautiful now looking back is that some of those people were not my family, but they became family. God used friendships to carry me through seasons that could have felt incredibly lonely. And now, years later, some of my sweetest memories come from tables that I never expected to sit at. So if family feels hard right now, or distant, or complicated, I just want you to hear me for a second. I understand personally. I understand. And I also want to gently encourage you to not give up on connection, because sometimes the people that God uses to help hold us together, they don't share our last name. Sometimes healthy friendships become one of the ways that God cares for us. And I really believe relationships matter more than we realize, not just emotionally, mentally, spiritually, but even physically. God designed us for connection, which honestly brings up the next important question. If relationships matter this much, why do they sometimes hurt this much too? And I think one of the biggest reasons comes down to something that we don't always talk about. It's called expectations. I have actually done a podcast episode on this, all about expectation, but we're going to talk about it a little bit here because it's important when we're talking about our relationships. If relationships matter this much, why do they feel this hard? People are wonderful, and people can also be complicated. And I think one of the biggest reasons relationships feel hard is something we don't talk about: expectations. The expectations that we have of other people, the expectations we quietly put on ourselves. And honestly, sometimes the expectations nobody even realizes exist, because so much of relationship hurt happens in the space between what we hope for and what actually happened. And this is where I came across something from Gretchen Rubin, and I've talked about this too, the 4 types of personalities and the way that we have our expectations. It really helped me understand relationships better, but not because I love labels, although I kind of do like being able to put things in boxes. And it wasn't because people fit neatly in those boxes though, but sometimes understanding people help us stop taking everything so personally. One of the things that she talks about is how people naturally respond to expectations in different ways. Some people naturally meet their expectations, whether outside or inside. Some people want some clarity before they decide if they're going to meet those expectations, and they need the reasons why. Some people push back when they feel pressure, and some genuinely want to follow through, but they do better if they have accountability. And when I first heard that, I thought, well, that explains some things, because sometimes we expect people to respond the way we would respond. And when they don't, we start making meaning out of it. I'm going to ask this question because I like the question. What are you making this mean? Because this matters. Maybe you're thoughtful. Maybe you remember birthdays and you notice the details. You naturally check in on people, and then someone forgets your birthday. And immediately your mind starts building this story. I must not matter. They don't care. Or maybe that person simply just loves you differently, communicates differently, processes differently, or honestly, sometimes people have different capacity. And I think that's important to say, because sometimes someone genuinely loves us deeply, but they do not have that emotional bandwidth to show up how we wish they could in that season of life. Now listen, that doesn't mean automatically we excuse unhealthy behavior. This is where discernment matters. Sometimes behavior is personality, sometimes it's maturity, sometimes it's wounds. Sometimes it's stress. Sometimes it's character. And wisdom is learning the difference, because understanding someone doesn't mean tolerating unhealthy behavior, but it might help us see people a little more clearly. Sometimes people aren't showing up at their healthiest because they are overwhelmed, exhausted, grieving, anxious, or just plain emotionally overloaded. And if you've listened to my podcast for any amount of time, you know that I care a lot about our nervous system. I think that's just the nurse geek in me. Because when people are stressed or dysregulated, they don't always respond like the healthiest version of themselves. That doesn't make hurtful behavior okay, but sometimes it helps us respond with a little more compassion. And really, that realization has helped me give people more grace. So instead of asking, why aren't you more like me? I start asking, who are they actually? And that's a really different question, because healthy relationships are not built on sameness. They're built on understanding, communication, grace, discernment. And I think one of the kindest things that we can do in relationships is stop expecting people to be a mirror of ourselves. Now, I want you to hear me, okay? This is super, super important that you hear me. This does not mean forcing unhealthy relationships. Healthy connection doesn't mean giving unlimited access to people who continually harm you. Some relationships need grace, some need communication, and some need boundaries, and some need distance. That's wisdom. But wisdom also asks, am I seeing this person clearly? Because sometimes disappointment comes from expecting someone to be who they simply are not. And that question alone can change a relationship. Now, can we honestly for a minute talk about the expectations that we quietly place on ourselves? Because I think this is where so many women live, especially women who are helpers, who are caregivers, moms, nurses, women who are used to being the dependable one. Some of us are exhausted, not because people expect too much, but because we expect too much from ourselves. And we quietly believe things like this: I should be able to handle this. I shouldn't need help. I need to keep everyone happy. I need to make sure everyone is okay, and I'll just rest later. And friend, if you're saying this, you know this is the truth. This is exhausting because somewhere along the way, many of us accidentally confused love with overfunctioning. Like loving people means carrying everything, fixing everything, managing everything, remembering everything, holding everything together. And eventually that will turn into resentment and bitterness. Resentment is kind of interesting because sometimes resentment is just information, but not always. Sometimes it's the dashboard light saying, you know what, something here needs attention, maybe expectations, maybe rest, maybe communication, maybe support, honesty, boundaries. And this makes me think a lot about the story of Martha and Mary, because honestly, I understand Martha, but I'm becoming more of a Mary. Martha gets painted as the stressed out one, but when I read her story, I see someone trying really hard, trying to care for people, make things nice, hold it together. And if we're honest, a lot of women listening probably relate to Martha. Meanwhile, Mary is sitting at the feet of Jesus, and Martha eventually reaches her limit. She's frustrated, overwhelmed, probably really resentful. And I think what stands out to me most is this. I can just see her. I can just see Martha with her hand on her hip and said, Jesus, I'm trying to make everybody, feel comfortable, put the table out looking good, making sure all the food is warm. And Mary, she's supposed to be helping, and she's sitting over here. I'm sure Martha was frustrated. I'm sure this was not a low level, low quiet conversation. I'm thinking she was at her wit's end. And the best thing about this story is that Jesus doesn't shame her. He redirects her, almost like you're carrying too much. And I wonder how many of us need that reminder, because sometimes we are carrying expectations that God never really assigned us. And that feels a little bit personal because there have absolutely been seasons in my own life where I thought I just need to do more, when really what I needed was support. I needed rest. I needed honesty, or simply just time with Jesus. And maybe somebody listening needs permission to hear this today. You can love deeply without carrying everything. You can care without rescuing. You can support without overextending. And honestly, I think healthy relationships become healthier when one person stops trying to carry the whole thing alone. And before we go further, I want to ask this really gently. What expectations are you carrying that God never actually asked you to hold on to? And that question may be worth sitting with for a minute. Okay, now we're going to jump into expectations versus expectancy. I think that there's a difference between expectations and expectancy. And honestly, I wonder how many of our relationships would feel healthier if we learned the difference, because expectations can quietly become very rigid. They sound like this, okay? Maybe sometimes when you hear examples, you're like, oh, okay, now that explains what is going on here. Language. All this information that you're taking in, that I'm sharing, that we're craving, is to give us language to what in the world is happening in our life, okay? So this is what expectations sound like. They should. They should call. They should understand. they should notice, they should change, they should show up differently. And friends, sometimes those expectations, they are reasonable. And sometimes we're expecting people to carry things only God was meant to carry, because people are human. They are imperfect. They're growing. They're limited, just like us. But expectancy feels different. Expectancy says, Lord, I'm going to trust you here. It's not this relationship has to go exactly the way I imagined. It's help me love wisely. Help me see clearly. Show me what is mine to carry and bring the right people. Help me know when to hold on and when to let go. And I love Psalm 62:5. My soul waits upon the Lord, for my expectation is from him. Because I think when our hope rests entirely on another human, never disappointing us, okay, life feels shaky. And sometimes we don't even know that we're putting that on someone else. But when you're getting your feelings hurt often, when you're feeling disappointment from other people often, this might be where you need some adjustment between expectations and expectancy. And that's what happens when God's word starts shaping the way that you think. And I want to say something important here. Expectancy isn't passive. It's not, well, I guess I'll just tolerate anything. No, that's not it. It's trusting God while still showing up wisely. It's prayer and discernment. It's grace and wisdom. It's love and healthy limits, okay? That feels a lot healthier than trying to control every relationship around us. Now, who walks beside you really matters. And I think this matters more than we realize, because if relationships affect our nervous system, our thoughts, our emotional health, then who we spend time with matters. And I want to say this gently because I know some relationships can feel kind of tender. Not everybody gets front row access to your life. That's not mean. That's wisdom. Proverbs says, walk with the wise and become wise. And I think healthy connection looks less like perfection and more like peace, honesty, growth, mutual care, people who can tell you the truth without tearing you down. And then that reminds me of David and Jonathan. I love their relationship, their friendship. So Jonathan strengthened David in God. And if you think about that, Jonathan was Saul's son. He was next in line for the throne. And he recognized that God had called David. And instead of resenting that, he helped David. He built David up. And that's a wonderful picture of a true friend. He encouraged him. He protected him. Jonathan reminded David of the truth. And everybody needs somebody who reminds them who they are when life gets hard. We all do. And maybe for you, that's family. Maybe it's friendship. Maybe it's someone from church. Maybe it's a mentor like Paul and Timothy. And if family relationships feel really hard right now, I want to remind you, you are not disqualified from healthy connection. Sometimes God gives us family. Sometimes he gives us people who become family, and both matter. But I do think we have to be intentional, because healthy connection usually doesn't happen accidentally. Sometimes it looks like joining the Bible study, texting the friend, saying yes to coffee, being honest instead of pretending everything is fine, allowing yourself to be known. And I know vulnerability feels scary, especially if you've been hurt before, especially if relationships have disappointed you. But I just want to say this. Don't let painful relationships convince you that healthy ones don't exist, because they do. Not perfect people, healthy people, people who are growing, people who take responsibility, people who repair after conflict, people who make room for honesty. And just because a relationship exists doesn't mean it is automatically healthy. And this matters because healthy connection doesn't mean forcing access to people who are continually harming you. Sometimes wisdom looks like grace. Sometimes it looks like distance. Sometimes wisdom looks like prayerfully adjusting expectations. And sometimes wisdom looks like opening your heart again. And before we move on, I just want to ask a couple questions for you to sit with here, okay? Who in your life helps you feel more grounded? Who helps you move toward the woman that God is calling you to be? And maybe equally important, what kind of friend am I becoming too? And that one gets me sometimes because healthy relationships goes both ways. Now, let's talk about boundaries for a minute. I know sometimes that word feels very heavy. It's either never let anyone in, or it's you should just tolerate everything because, Jesus, right? Neither one is healthy. Healthy boundaries are not punishment. They aren't rejection. They aren't walls. They are stewardship of your peace, your energy, your time, your emotional capacity, your relationship with God. Boundaries often become necessary when we have been overextending for too long. And this is where I think about our Lord. Because if anyone had unlimited demands on his time, it was Jesus. People constantly needed him. Crowds followed him, pressure everywhere, needs everywhere. And yet scripture repeatedly shows Jesus stepping away to pray, to rest, withdrawing, reconnecting with the Father, but not because he didn't care, but because he understood what he needed to stay grounded. And if Jesus needed time with God, just stop and think about that. God in the flesh needed time with God. How much more then do we need that, right? And maybe somebody listening today needs permission to hear this. Rest is not selfish. Time with God is not selfish. Saying no is not selfish. Sometimes wisdom sounds like this. I can't do that right now. I need time to think about that. I love you, but I can't carry that for you. And listen, people may feel disappointed sometimes, and it doesn't automatically mean that you're doing something wrong. Because I think many of us, especially women, have accidentally connected disappointment with others in others means that we failed. Sometimes disappointment is simply what happens when you're honest about your limits. And healthy boundaries often protect relationships. They do not destroy them because eventually, if we never rest, if we never refill, we never reconnect with God, we stop showing up as the healthiest version of ourselves, and exhausted people struggle relationally. We get short-tempered, overwhelmed, emotionally flooded, resentful, but not because we're bad people, because we're depleted people. And friend, you matter too, not just everybody else. You matter. Your peace matters. Your health matters. Your relationship with God matters. And healthy stewardship sometimes sounds like, I love you deeply, but I cannot keep carrying everything. And that is okay. All right. That's hard. A lot of this stuff is hard. I hope that in this discussion, you have felt more of the goodness and not the hardness of this conversation. But if you have, if some of this has been difficult, I think God's talking to you and you need to listen. Healthy connections matter. And I know that relationships can feel complicated sometimes. I know family can feel hard. I know friendship can feel vulnerable. And I know loneliness is real. And I also know this. God did not design us to walk through life completely alone. We were created for connection, not perfect relationships, not flawless people, but grounded, grace-filled connection. People who remind us who we are, people who point us back to the truth, people who sit beside us when life feels heavy. And if you don't have that right now, I do not want you to lose heart, okay? Sometimes healthy relationships take time to build. Sometimes they come in unexpected seasons. Sometimes God brings people into our lives who don't share our last name, but become family anyway. And maybe your takeaway from today is simple. I'm going to stop isolating. Or maybe I'm going to rethink the expectations that I've been carrying. Maybe it's I need healthier boundaries. Or maybe I'm going to trust God a little more with this relationship. Whatever it is, just take one step. One honest, tiny, brave step. Because healing and healthy connection usually happen little by little. And friend, if no one has told you lately, you matter. Your relationships matter. You are worth having people around you who help you feel more grounded, peaceful, and supported. You're worth that. So if today's episode has encouraged you, would you do me a favor? Follow the podcast so you don't miss future episodes. Take a gander through the old episodes. Some of this stuff I have talked about before in a little bit more detail if you're interested in this. And if you know another woman who might need this conversation, send it to her. Truly. Sharing episodes is one of the biggest ways that this message reaches women who need encouragement. And if you want more support, coaching, resources, or information about upcoming retreats and events, head over to lhplifecoach.com. There are freebies, encouragement, and ways that we can work together. If you're feeling stuck and you want support in renewing your mind and creating healthier rhythms in your life. Now, until next time, take care of your mind and your body and your spirit. You don't have to figure this all out at once. You are still in the making, and God is faithful in every season. Thanks for listening, friend. I'll see you next week.